The courtroom was a battlefield, and I was losing. My heart pounded as the judge's gavel loomed like a guillotine, ready to sever my future. I was 25, alone, and staring down a legal nightmare that could strip me of everything: my home, my savings, my dignity. My name is Ethan Caldwell, a small-town graphic designer with dreams bigger than my bank account. I'd moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, chasing a life of freedom and art, but now I was tangled in a lawsuit from my former landlord, a vengeful man claiming I'd trashed his property. The evidence was fabricated, photos of a wrecked apartment I'd never seen, but his lawyer was a shark, and I was drowning. Enter James Whitaker, the attorney who walked into my life like a storm breaking a drought. James was 32, with sharp blue eyes and a presence that silenced rooms. His tailored suit hugged his frame, and his voice carried a calm authority that made you believe he could bend the world to his will. He wasn't just my lawyer, he was my lifeline. "I'll take care of you," he'd said during our first meeting, his hand resting briefly on mine. I didn't know then how much those words would mean. The lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was personal. My landlord, Richard Hayes, had discovered I was gay after seeing me with a date at a local cafe. His evidence appeared the next week, a clear attempt to ruin me for who I was. In 2025, you'd think prejudice like that was fading, but in pockets of America, it still festers. James saw through it instantly. "This isn't about property damage," he told me, his jaw tight. "It's about power, and I won't let him win." Our meetings became my anchor. James's office, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Raleigh's skyline, felt like a sanctuary. He'd lean forward, elbows on his desk, dissecting the case with precision while I tried not to notice the way his smile softened when he caught me staring. "Focus, Ethan," he'd tease, but his eyes lingered too. There was something unspoken growing between us, a spark I was too scared to name. The case dragged on for weeks, each court date a fresh wound. Richard's lawyer painted me as a reckless, irresponsible tenant, twisting my life into a caricature. I'd leave the courtroom shaking, but James was always there, a steady hand on my shoulder. "We're building something solid," he'd say. "Trust me." And I did, because what choice did I have? But it wasn't just trust. It was the way he listened, the way he remembered small details, like how I took my coffee or the name of my childhood dog. He saw me, not just as a client, but as a person. One evening, after a brutal day in court, James invited me to his apartment to review documents. It was a modest place, not what you'd expect from a lawyer of his caliber. Cozy, with bookshelves stuffed with legal texts and old vinyl records. We sat on his couch, papers spread across the coffee table, but the air felt different. Heavy. He poured me a glass of wine, his fingers brushing mine as he handed it over. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan," he said softly. "You're fighting for more than just this case. You're fighting for your truth." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I looked at him, really looked, and saw something in his eyes I hadn't dared to hope for. Vulnerability. Desire. The room seemed to shrink, the space between us charged with possibility. "James," I started, but he shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not tonight," he said. "We've got a war to win first." The next court date was a turning point. James dismantled Richard's case with surgical precision, exposing inconsistencies in the photos and presenting witnesses who'd seen the apartment pristine when I moved out. The judge's expression shifted, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. But Richard wasn't done. He leaned over to his lawyer, whispering furiously, and I knew he was planning something worse. That night, James called me, his voice urgent. "Meet me at the park near your place. We need to talk." I arrived at dusk, the air cool and thick with the scent of grass. James was waiting on a bench, his tie loosened, hair slightly mussed. He looked less like a lawyer and more like a man carrying a weight he couldn't share. "Richard's escalating," he said. "He's digging into your personal life, trying to smear you publicly. I won't let it happen, Ethan. I promise." I didn't know what to say. The lawsuit was no longer just about money or a lease. It was an attack on my identity, my right to exist as I was. James stood, pacing, his hands clenched. "I've seen this before," he said. "People like him. They think they can break you. But they don't know you. They don't know us." "Us?" I echoed, my heart racing. He stopped, turning to face me. The park was quiet, the last rays of sunlight painting his face gold. "Yeah," he said, stepping closer. "Us." And then he kissed me, a soft, urgent kiss that felt like a vow. My world tilted, the fear and chaos of the past weeks melting into that single moment. His hands cupped my face, and I felt safe, wanted seen. But the war wasn't over. Richard's next move was a low blow, a smear campaign on local forums, accusing me of everything from vandalism to worse, all laced with homophobic venom. James was furious, but he didn't waver. "We fight back," he said, "not with lies, but with truth." He worked late nights, tracking down every post, every comment, building a case for defamation. I watched him pour himself in my defense, and I realized I wasn't just falling for him. I was in love with him. The courtroom loomed again, but this time I wasn't alone. James stood beside me, his presence a shield against the world. As the judge called the session to order, I glanced at him, and he gave me a small, determined nod. Whatever came next, I knew he'd keep his promise. He'd take care of me, not just as my lawyer, but as the man who'd stolen my heart. The courtroom air was thick with tension, a storm brewing behind the judge's stern gaze. Richard's lawyer stood, his smirk oozing confidence as he presented new evidence, a series of doctored emails suggesting I'd threatened Richard. My stomach churned, but James's hand brushed mine under the table, a silent anchor. James rose, his voice steady but laced with fire. "Your Honor, this is a fabrication, and we can prove it." He produced forensic reports showing the emails were manipulated, timestamps altered to frame me. The judge's brow furrowed, and Richard's smug expression faltered. I watched James command a room, every word a calculated strike, and felt a surge of pride mixed with something deeper, something that made my chest ache. Outside the courthouse, the world felt different. The spring air was crisp, and Raleigh streets buzzed with life, but all I could see was James. He walked me to my car, his usual composure softened by exhaustion. "We're close, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "But Richard's desperate. He'll try anything now." I wanted to ask about us, about that kiss in the park, but his phone buzzed, a call from his investigator. He squeezed my arm, promising to call later, and I drove home, my mind a tangle of fear and longing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The smear campaign had spread, venomous posts popping up on social media, calling me a liar, a deviant. My phone lit up with notifications, each one a dagger. I'd always been private about my life, but now it was being dissected by strangers. At 2 a.m., my phone rang. "James." "I saw the post," he said, his voice tight. "I'm coming over." He arrived in jeans and a sweater, looking more like a friend than a lawyer. We sat on my couch, the dim light casting shadows across his face. "This isn't just about the case anymore," he said. "It's about who gets to define you, and I won't let them." His hand found mine, and I felt the weight of his words, the promise behind them. We talked for hours, about the case, about life, about the fears we'd both buried. He told me about growing up in a small town, hiding who he was to fit in, and how he'd fought to become the man he was now. I told him about my art, my dreams of creating something that mattered. Somewhere in those quiet hours, the line between lawyer and lover blurred. The next morning, James was all business again, but the warmth in his eyes lingered. He'd uncovered a lead, a former tenant who'd faced similar harassment from Richard. Her testimony could turn the tide. We met her at a diner, a nervous woman named Clara who recounted how Richard had targeted her after learning she was bisexual. "He's a bully," she said, her voice shaking. "He thinks he's untouchable." James listened intently, jotting notes, his focus unwavering. I saw the man who'd kissed me in the park, but also the warrior who'd promised to protect me. Back in court, Clara's testimony was a bombshell. She spoke clearly, her story mirroring mine, exposing Richard's pattern of targeting anyone who didn't fit his narrow worldview. The judge's expression darkened, and Richard's lawyers scrambled to object, but James was relentless. He presented chat logs, lease agreements, anything to corroborate Clara's story. By the end of the day, the courtroom felt less like a battlefield and more like a stage where justice might actually prevail. But victory was still out of reach. Richard's team doubled down, filing a motion to delay the trial, claiming new witnesses. James warned me it was a stalling tactic, meant to wear us down. "They're scared," he said, his voice firm. "We're exposing them, and they know it." We were sitting in his office, the city lights glittering outside. He looked at me, his eyes searching. "Ethan, this fight, it's bigger than us. It's about every person who's been targeted for who they are. We can't stop now." I nodded, but my heart was racing for a different reason. The way he said my name, the way he fought for me, it was more than duty. I reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. "James," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "why are you doing this? All of this?" He looked at me, his expression raw. "Because you deserve it, and because..." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Because I'm falling for you, Ethan, and I can't let you face this alone." His words hit me like a wave, and before I could think, I kissed him. It was desperate, hungry, a release of all the fear and hope we'd been carrying. He kissed me back, his hands pulling me closer, and for a moment, the world outside didn't exist. But reality crashed back the next day. Richard's team leaked a story to a local news site, twisting my relationship with James into a scandal, claiming he was biased, unprofessional. The comments section was a cesspool of hate, and I felt the walls closing in. James was unfazed. "Let them talk," he said. "They're grasping at straws. We got the truth on our side." But I saw the strain in his eyes, the toll this was taking. He was fighting for me, but at what cost? As the trial's final days approached, James worked tirelessly, preparing for the last stand. He tracked down more witnesses, built a defamation countersuit, and shielded me from the worst of the online vitriol. Every night, we'd steal moments together, a quiet dinner, a walk in the park, a kiss that felt like defiance. I was falling deeper, but fear gnawed at me. What if we won the case, but lost each other? What if the world's judgment was too much? The courtroom awaited, and so did our future. James squeezed my hand as we walked in, his promise echoing in my mind. He'd take care of me, and I was starting to believe he always would. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, every glance and whisper amplifying the stakes. Richard's lawyer paced like a predator, his eyes glinting as he called a surprise witness, a former neighbor who claimed I'd been disruptive. The accusation was vague, laced with insinuations about my personal life, but James was ready. He cross-examined with surgical precision, exposing the neighbor's ties to Richard and dismantling her credibility. I watched, heart pounding, as James turned their trap into our triumph. Outside, the media storm raged. The leaked story about our relationship had exploded, painting James as a reckless attorney and me as a manipulator. Local blogs ran headlines like, "Lawyer's love affair taints case," and the comments were brutal. I wanted to hide, but James wouldn't let me. "They want you to feel small," he said, his voice fierce. "Don't give them that power." We were at his apartment, the city's lights a distant glow through the window. He pulled me close, his arms a shield against the world's venom. "We're in this together, Ethan. All of it." His words kept me grounded, but the pressure was wearing us both down. James was spending late nights strategizing, his phone buzzing with calls from colleagues warning him about professional fallout. "They think I'm risking my career," he admitted one night, rubbing his temples. "But I don't care. This is about you. About us." I wanted to believe him, but guilt gnawed at me. Was I worth this? Was our love worth the cost? The next court session brought a breakthrough. James presented a bombshell, a recorded conversation between Richard and a private investigator, discussing ways to dig up dirt on me. The audio was grainy but damning, Richard's voice dripping with malice as he targeted my identity. The judge's face hardened, and the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. James glanced at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes, but I could see the exhaustion etched into his features. He was fighting a war on two fronts, for my case and for our right to be together. After court, we escaped to a quiet park, the same one where we'd shared our first kiss. The air was warm, the sunset painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. We sat on a bench, our shoulders brushing, and for a moment, the world felt kind. "I never thought I'd find this," James said, his voice soft. "Someone worth fighting for like this." I turned to him, my heart full. "You're worth it too, James. More than you know." He smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes, a fear he wouldn't voice. I kissed him then, slow and deliberate, pouring everything I felt into that moment. The world could judge us, but they couldn't take this. The next day, the backlash intensified. A local advocacy group, spurred by Richard's allies, protested outside the courthouse, holding signs condemning immoral influences. I felt exposed, raw, but James stood tall, guiding me through the crowd with a protective hand on my back. Inside, he delivered a closing argument that left the room silent. He spoke of justice, of truth, of the right to live without fear. "This case isn't just about Elise," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "It's about whether we let hate win. And we won't." I saw tears in the eyes of a juror, and my chest tightened with hope. But hope was fragile. That night, James got a call from his firm's senior partner. I watched his face pale as he listened, his jaw tight. When he hung up, he looked at me, his expression unreadable. "They're considering suspending me," he said. "They think my involvement with you is a liability." My heart sank. I'd known the risks, but hearing it out loud felt like a punch. "James, I'm so sorry," I whispered. He shook his head, pulling me into his arms. "Don't be. I chose this. I chose you." We spent the night talking, planning, holding each other. James was resolute. He'd fight the suspension, fight for the case, fight for us. But the weight of it all was crushing me. I loved him, but I couldn't shake the fear that my fight was ruining him. The next morning, I found a letter slipped under my door, an anonymous threat, warning me to drop the case or face consequences. My hand shook as I showed it to James. His eyes darkened, but his voice was steady. "They're scared, Ethan. This is their last card. We're going to win." James doubled his efforts, working with a private investigator to trace the threat. He uncovered a paper trail linking it to one of Richard's associates, a small but crucial piece of evidence. In court, he presented it with calm fury, painting a picture of a man desperate to silence us. The judge ordered an investigation into Richard's conduct, and the tide turned further in our favor. But the victory fell hollow. The threats, the protests, the media, they were chipping away at us. I saw it in James's eyes, the strain he tried to hide behind his confidence. One night, as we lay in bed, the moonlight casting shadows across his face, I asked the question that had haunted me. "What if we lose everything, James? Your career, my life here. What if it's all for nothing?" He turned to me, his hand tracing my jaw. "It's not for nothing," he said. "You're my reason, Ethan. Win or lose, I'm all in." His words broke me open, and I kissed him, tears mixing with the taste of him. In that moment, I knew I'd fight as hard as he was, for us, for our truth, for the life we could build. The trial's end was near, and the stakes had never been higher. James was ready to deliver the final blow, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard had one last trick up his sleeve. As we walked into court, hand in hand, I felt the weight of every eye on us. But I also felt James's strength, his promise holding me together. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. The courtroom was a crucible, every word a spark that could ignite or extinguish our fight. Richard's lawyer stood, his voice dripping with false sincerity as he introduced a final piece of evidence, a grainy video allegedly showing me vandalizing the apartment. My heart stopped, but James was already on his feet, objecting with a ferocity that silenced the room. "This is a desperate fabrication, Your Honor," he said, producing an expert analysis, proving the video was edited. The judge's eyes narrowed, and Richard's composure cracked, his face reddening as James dismantled his last lie. Outside, the protests had grown louder, a small crowd chanting slurs and waving signs. I felt exposed, my life laid bare for strangers to judge. James shielded me as we left, his arm around my shoulders, but I saw the toll it was taking. His firm had officially suspended him, citing professional conflicts. He brushed it off, saying it was temporary, but I knew the truth. He was sacrificing everything for me. That night, we retreated to my apartment, the only place that still felt safe. The world outside was a storm, but inside it was just us. James sat on my couch, his tie discarded, his hair messy from running his hands through it. "I don't regret any of it," he said, his voice raw. "But I need you to know this fight, it's not just for you. It's for everyone who's been told they don't belong." I knelt in front of him, taking his hands. "And you?" I asked. "What about what you're losing?" He smiled, a tired, beautiful smile. "I'm gaining more than I'm losing, Ethan. I'm gaining you." We kissed, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that felt like a promise kept. But the weight of the threats lingered. Another anonymous note had arrived, this one more explicit, warning me to leave Raleigh. James reported it to the police, but they could only do so much. He stayed over that night, his presence a comfort, but I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining the worst, losing the case, losing him, losing myself. The next day, James uncovered a game-changer. His investigator found a whistleblower, a former employee of Richard's who'd kept records of his shady dealings, including bribes to fabricate evidence. In court, James presented the documents with devastating clarity, linking Richard to a pattern of harassment against multiple tenants. The judge ordered Richard to testify, and under James's relentless questioning, he crumbled, admitting to targeting me because of my identity. The courtroom gasped, and I felt a weight lift, but not entirely. The damage was done. My name was still smeared, James's career was in jeopardy, and the world outside was still hostile. After court, we walked through the park, the air heavy with the scent of blooming flowers. James stopped by the same bench where we'd first kissed, pulling me down beside him. "We're going to win, Ethan," he said, his voice steady. "But even if we don't, I need you to know I'd do it all again." His words broke something in me, and I buried my face in his shoulder, tears soaking his shirt. "I love you," I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. He froze, then pulled me closer, his voice thick. "I love you too, Ethan. God, I love you." The final court date loomed, and the tension was unbearable. James prepared meticulously, his focus razor-sharp, but I saw the strain in his eyes. The night before, we lay in bed, his arms around me, and I asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What happens after this, James? If we win, if we lose, what's next for us?" He was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing patterns on my back. "We build a life," he said finally, "together, no matter what." The courtroom was packed on the last day. James delivered his closing argument, his voice a blend of passion and precision. He spoke of justice, of truth, of the right to love without fear. "Ethan Caldwell isn't just fighting for himself," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "He's fighting for every person who's been targeted for who they are. And we cannot let hate win." The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I saw a juror wipe away a tear, and my heart swelled with pride and fear. The judge deliberated for hours, each minute an eternity. James held my hand under the table, his thumb tracing circles on my skin. When the judge returned, her voice was steady. "In light of the evidence, I find in favor of the defendant, Ethan Caldwell. All charges are dismissed, and a countersuit for defamation is granted." The courtroom erupted, but I barely heard it. James pulled me into his arms, and I clung to him, tears streaming down my face. We'd won, but at what cost? Outside, the crowd was still there, their signs and shouts a reminder that the world hadn't changed. But James's hand in mine felt like a victory in itself. He leaned down, whispering in my ear, "We did it, Ethan, and I'm not going anywhere." I looked at him, his blue eyes bright with determination, and I knew he meant it. The fight wasn't over, but we'd face it together. Two men against the world, bound by a promise stronger than hate. The courtroom victory was ours, but the world outside didn't pause to celebrate. The protests lingered, the online hate surged, and James's suspension from his firm became permanent. I felt the weight of it all, guilt gnawing at me, as we left the courthouse, his hand in mine. "This isn't your fault," he said, reading my thoughts. "I made my choices, Ethan, and I'd make them again." We retreated to his apartment, the city's noise a distant hum. The space felt different now, less like a sanctuary, more like a battlefield we'd survived. James poured us wine, his movements slow, deliberate. "What now?" I asked, my voice small. He sat beside me, his knee brushing mine. "Now we live," he said. "We build something real, something they can't take away." His words were a lifeline, but the fear lingered. Could we really outrun the world's judgment? The next week was a blur. The defamation countersuit moved forward, with James leading the charge despite his suspension. He worked from home, his dining table covered in legal pads and coffee cups. I helped where I could, organizing files, sketching to calm my nerves. My art became my refuge, and James encouraged it, hanging my drawings on his walls. "You're going to do big things," he said one night, studying a sketch of the park where we'd kissed, "and I'll be there to see it." His faith in me felt like a gift I didn't deserve. But the threats didn't stop. Another letter arrived, this one targeting James, warning him to back off. He reported it, his jaw tight, but I saw the worry in his eyes. "I can handle it," he said, but I wasn't so sure. I started noticing strangers lingering near my apartment, shadows that vanished when I looked too long. One night, I woke to a brick through my window, a note tied to it. "Leave or else." James was there in minutes, his arms around me as the police took statements. "We're not running," he said, his voice fierce. "They don't get to win." He hired a private security firm, dipping into his savings to keep us safe. I hated that it had come to this, but James wouldn't hear my apologies. "This is what it means to fight," he said, "and I promised I'd take care of you." His words echoed in my heart, a reminder of the man who'd stood by me through every storm. I loved him more than I could say, but I was terrified of what our love was costing him. The defamation suit gained traction, with more victims of Richard's harassment coming forward. James built a coalition, turning our fight into a movement. Local advocacy groups rallied behind us, and a media narrative began to shift, stories of our resilience replacing the hate. One evening, we spoke at a community event, standing side by side as we shared our story. The crowd applauded, and for the first time, I felt like we weren't alone. James squeezed my hand, his smile bright despite the exhaustion etched into his face. Months later, the defamation suit settled in our favor, the payout enough to cover legal fees and start over. Richard faded into obscurity, his reputation in tatters. But the victory was bittersweet. James couldn't return to his firm, and I was still rebuilding my life in a city that had seen me at my lowest. We decided to leave Raleigh, not out of defeat, but to chase a fresh start. We moved to a small coastal town in Maine, a place where the ocean stretched endless and the world felt quieter. Our new home was a fixer-upper, with creaky floors and a view of the harbor. We painted the walls together, laughing as we smudged blue on each other's faces. I started a small art studio, teaching classes to local kids, while James launched a solo practice, taking on cases for those who couldn't afford representation. We were healing, growing, building a life brick by brick. The threats stopped, the hate faded, and we found peace in the rhythm of our days. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we walked along the shore, the waves lapping at our feet. James stopped, pulling me close. "I promised I'd take care of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I meant every word. He dropped to one knee, a simple silver ring glinting in his hand. "Ethan Caldwell, will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, pulling him up into a kiss that tasted of salt and hope. The world had tried to break us, but we'd built something stronger. Love, unyielding and true. Years later, I'd look back on that moment as the start of our forever. We married in a small ceremony, surrounded by friends who'd become family. My art flourished, James's practice thrived, and we became a beacon for others fighting their own battles. Our story wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, about proving that love could conquer even the darkest storms. James had promised to take care of me, and he did, every day, with every breath, proving he meant every word.